it's time for another story. Although today we'll be covering Arsinoe and Ptolemy the 13th again in more detail. Now, we'll mostly be focusing on Arsinoe this time around, because in reality, Ptolemy the 13th and 14th aren't really that important to the stories other than the role that they fill. With that, Arsinoe was born between 68 BC and 63 BC. The sources are unclear, as tends to be with the case with most of the Ptolemy family when it's not the male members of family or Cleopatra, the one that's the final queen of Egypt, not the other three. Anyways, so with that, it's unclear. Most of the time when referencing her age, I'm going to be referencing the age range of where she's likely to be at that time. So with that, we are dealing with about maybe a 5-year difference in between the ages, so it does have to be taken into consideration, but that's because the records are unclear. Now, the way that this story really starts, before this event, she wasn't really well known. There wasn't much known about her. She was a spare daughter. She was the third born or the fourth born, depending on whether or not Cleopatra the Sixth is their sister or what's going on with that. But either way, she's the youngest daughter of Aloetes. As such, she tends to be less known. With that, her story really starts after Cleopatra, the last queen of Egypt, ascends to the throne with Ptolemy the 13th, her brother, as her husband and co-ruler. With that, Ptolemy the 13th decided he was done sharing the throne. He didn't want to share it with Cleopatra, so he pretty much kicked her out. Whether or not he kicked her out of all of Egypt or just out of Alexandria, the sources I could find were unclear on which one it was, whether she was kicked out of all of Egypt or if she was just kicked out of the capital of Egypt, Alexandria. With that, so she was out of Alexandria, so Ptolemy the 13th took his sister Arsinoe as his wife, but she wasn't his co-ruler, at least not yet. With that, there is a bit of a side note that we need to get to, and that's between Julius Caesar, the one everyone knows, which, well, fact, in his native language, Latin, the way you would say his name is actually Julius Caesar. It's not Julius Caesar, it's Julius Caesar. That's how you would say his name. It's similar to the Veni Vidi Vici is actually said Veni Vidi Vici. So with that, that's how he would actually pronounce his name. Just a little side fact that might be fun. With that, he was rivals. Originally, they were triumvirate. There were 3 of them. One of them died. Then there was Pompey and Julius Caesar. So they were vying for control over Rome. And they were having their own little civil war thing going on there. With that, Julius Caesar defeated Pompey in 48 BC at the Battle of Pharsalus? Yes, I want to make sure I get that name right, because I always pronounce it wrong. The Battle of Pharsalus, he fled, because remember, Pompey was a friend of Ptolemy the 12th, Aloetes. So he fled to Egypt, hoping that Ptolemy the 13th would sort of give him sanctuary to be his friend, that sort of thing, like his father had. Which, to be quite honest, was a good enough scheme as any to get away from Julius Caesar, because at this point he's won the Battle of Lethia. He's pretty much a big old war hero, and he's only like a year away from being dictator at this point. He's a big shot. With that, what Pompey didn't expect when he ran to Ptolemy the 13th was for Ptolemy the 13th to then behead him. Another thing that we need to cover: Julius Caesar had no intentions of executing Pompey. Him and Pompey had been old friends. They used to be allies. They were close. Believe that Julius Caesar also married Pompey's daughter, so in a way, Pompey was his father-in-law. He was planning on pardoning Pompey once the Civil War was over. He was just gonna gonna be cool again, that sort of thing. He wasn't planning on killing Pompey. So when Ptolemy the 13th presented Pompey's severed head to Julius Caesar, Julius Caesar was not very pleased. Not at all. So with that, while he was just stewing in his rage and Ptolemy the 13th wondering, what did I do so wrong? That sort of thing. Cleopatra sneaks back into the palace. And mind you, they're in Alexandria. And she woos Caesar. Now those two are on the same side. But now we've got a problem. We have two factions within one palace. Pretty quickly, Caesar takes his opportunity. He takes Arsinoe and Ptolemy the 13th into captivity. They're his hostages, and he thinks that'll be enough to where he can put Cleopatra on the throne. Be like, hey, I have your rulers. You can't fight me without these guys getting killed. What are you going to do? I'm saying Cleopatra's queen, and she originally was anyways. He didn't expect for the Egyptian army to then rise up against him and fight him, because he had their rulers in captivity. He had their king and the king's wife. So he doesn't expect them to fight back. Now here's another key fact that I need to put into the story right here. There's this thing called the Pharos Lighthouse, also known nowadays as the Alexandrian Lighthouse or the Lighthouse of Alexandria. It is one of the 7 wonders of the world, but to them it was the Lighthouse of Pharos or the Pharos Lighthouse. With that, Alexandria was a harbor city, which means all the traffic came in through the sea. Everything passed by the Pharos Lighthouse, and the lighthouse pretty much controlled the traffic in and out because of the way it worked. If you took the lighthouse, you took Alexandria. At least that was the theory behind it. And Julius Caesar wanted that lighthouse. Now, with this is a war, and it is a battle from very long ago, which means there are conflicting sources on how exactly that battle went. I am going to cover the version that I've heard the most and seen in my sources the most. That does not mean that this is the only version of how this battle went. And if you find another version that conflicts, I can totally see that, because I've seen other versions that totally conflict with the one that I'm about to tell you. But either way, these are more the little nitty-picky parts of the battle, rather than how the battle ended overall. So the way that it goes is that Julius Caesar set fire to some of the ships in the harbor, not sure if they were his or just ships docked in the harbor. That's always unclear. To cause a distraction so he could take the Pharos Lighthouse. While he was doing that, there was a special one that's usually referenced, and it's Ganymedes. He was a eunuch, he was a friend of Arsinoe's, he was like her second in command. And he snuck into the palace, or some guards snuck into the palace, and were able to take Arsinoe out of the palace and get her back to the Egyptian army. Now, they also wanted to get Ptolemy the 13th, but they couldn't because he was too well guarded. Or at least that's how it goes in this version of the story. Now, this is one part that usually is the same across them. There was a general called Achilles. He led the armies, and Arsinoe was brought to him by Ganymedes. And Achilles says, no, you're not the queen, you're just a little girl, because at this point she's between 15 to 19. And she's young, she's barely known, she's never been in a battle, none of this, so he doesn't want to give up command to her. So Arsinoe tells Ganymedes to kill Achilles. And he does, and Achilles is dead, so she appoints Ganymedes as her top general, her second in command now. And this girl, against all odds, leads with Ganymedes the army of Egypt against Julius Caesar, who's now in the Pharos Lighthouse. He's taken the lighthouse, so it's thought game over, he's taken Alexandria, and Arsinoe marches on him. And she wins. She has defeated his forces, and he's now at the top of the lighthouse. And it said that he took off his armor and his purple cloak, which was a big sign of his power, of him being part of the triumvirate, of him being top dog in Rome. And he has to jump from the lighthouse into the sea and try to swim to shore to try and survive this army that's coming after him, led by this young girl. Remember, this is Julius Caesar. He's never been defeated in, like, a battle. It's thought that it would impossible for her to beat him in a battle, rather. So, anyways. He jumps and she takes his cloak and waves it as her flag of victory over the Pharaoh's lighthouse. And here's where, unfortunately, the story does turn pretty sad. With that, once they're pushed out of Alexandria, Caesar did take Ptolemy XIII with him. His soldiers were able to take Ptolemy XIII out of Egypt, or at least out of Alexandria. And the generals of Arsinoe's army, the Egyptian army, brokered a negotiation between them and Caesar. It was pretty much a switch. They wanted to switch Arsinoe for Ptolemy XIII. And that's what they did. So Arsinoe ended up a captive of Rome, and Ptolemy XIII waged the civil war against Julius Caesar. He ended up losing, and we will cover that most likely in another video when we're covering Cleopatra and Julius Caesar and the whole civil war. But for now, all that you need to know is that Ptolemy XIII is out of the picture. He's dead. He died at the end of this, but he died mysteriously, actually. Sources aren't entirely clear. Anyways, so there's this thing called a triumvirate. When a major general of Rome would win a battle, they would parade their captives, pretty much the opposing general, through the city of Rome, and at the very end of it, they would strangle them to death. And mind you, at this point in time, Arsinoe is still like 15 to 19 years old, in that age range. She's a young girl. So he parades her through Rome, right behind a burning effigy of the Pharaoh's lighthouse, saying, I don't care if she won, she shamed me, but I won against her in the end, is pretty much what that was about. But anyways, so they get to the end of the triumph, and he is pressured by the Roman populace who've seen this girl paraded through the street in beggar clothes, who's a princess, a little girl, and they pressure him to spare her life. And he does, because he doesn't have much choice in the matter. He exiles her to the Temple of Artemis in Ephesus. Now, we have to fast forward a couple years. And this is after Julius Caesar has died. And so we've got Octavian and Mark Antony in the story. They're rivals, they both want control over Rome. With that, Mark Antony is the leader of Ephesus. He controls Ephesus, where Arsinoe is. And this probably played into why Cleopatra hooked up with Antony in the end, and chose Antony. Although it's not the only reason. With that, Cleopatra pretty much told Mark Antony, hey, kill my sister for me. Because, mind you, the Temple of Artemis was seen as a sacred place. Once somebody was given sanctuary there, like Arsinoe was, they're pretty much untouchable. You couldn't kill them, you couldn't do anything to them under Roman law. But Mark Antony had control of it, so he sent in his soldiers, they dragged her out of the temple, and they killed her on the temple steps and left her there. She was found in the morning, and the Roman populace were not happy at all. This was the girl that they had pressured Julius Caesar to spare years before. Mind you, this is in 41 BC, so this is only about 4 or 5 years after she had been paraded through Rome. They're not happy that she's dead. And this was one of the touchstones that Octavian often referenced when trying to drag Cleopatra and Mark Antony's names through the mud. And it's unfortunate how her story ended, but fortunately not all history is fun and butterflies. I hope you've enjoyed this story, and I hope that maybe telling her story will make it so that way Arsinoe is less of a footnote in history, but who knows. There is this whole conundrum, this whole mystery about her tomb. You can go look it up, Arsinoe's tomb, because there's so many different conflicting narratives on that. You would just have to look it up to see it. Have a nice night.